Welcome to the Scoop on Poop. And I know you guys have been pretty excited to hear about our journey that we're going to be taking with Timmy today. And the whole reason behind taking this journey is to figure out really what happens to our sewage. And some people might be saying, oh, this is gross. But yet think about it. There's 7 billion people on this planet. There's actually over 7 billion people on this planet. And all of our waste has to go somewhere. And what I'm going to try and do with you today is answer, where does it go here in Baraboo? And the reason why we want to know where it goes is so that we understand that it's important that we have a really good sewage treatment facility. And the reason for that is, well, there's a lot of disease-carrying or disease-causing organisms in our sewage. So if we don't treat it properly, we could get very sick. Now, when we look at sewage, sewage is about 99% water. And the other interesting fact is that the average person, are you average? If you're the average person here in the United States, you actually spend 3 years of your life on the toilet. Now, this is one of the things that I had a hard time believing, but it's a fact that I found. The average person in the United States spends 3 years of their life on the toilet. So we want to know what happens once it leaves our house, once it leaves the school. And the biggest reason is so that we can keep our groundwater safe. So let's take a look here. How many of you know where the wastewater treatment facility is in Baraboo? How many of you have seen it? And so and I'll show you a map of where it's located in a little bit, but it's actually located back by the Baraboo River, and there's a reason why it's located near the Baraboo River, and I'll explain that in a little bit. But it's actually located, yeah, I'm trying to think here, that must be the southeast side of the city. And it started working in 1982, and it was one of the first in the United States to use the Dutch carousel design. And it used biological use of phosphorus removal without chemical backup. And that is really neat. We were one of the first in the United States to do that. And here's an actual aerial view of the plant. Now, if you excuse me just a little bit, I'm going to lower that a little bit. That way we're right on. And when we look at this aerial view, we're actually, Mr. Phillips and I took a tour of the facility. So we're actually going to go to each one of these areas. We're going to start out here, and we're just going to work our way around, and I'll show you what each one of these things are. Now, first of all, that's Baraboo. Do you notice how it only has 2 of these round circles? Well, this is the wastewater sewage plant in Madison. Madison's a lot larger community than us. But when we look at this one, you can tell it's larger because it's got more of those circles. So you think Madison's large. Well, here's Chicago. This is the Stickney Water Treatment Facility in Chicago. So you can see they have a lot more. This one serves, well, it serves millions of people. Now you might say, here's an underground water treatment plant in New York City. And you might look at it and say, what? Where's the wastewater facility? Well, when you're in a large community like New York and you got all these high-rise towers, what they actually did was they put it underneath this. So it's on one facility, or it's on one level, and then he built this entire park, this athletic park, above the wastewater treatment plant. Because let's face it, no one wants to live in one of these high-rise towers looking out at a water treatment facility. It's just, it's not thinking about it. So let's get back to Baraboo. So this was Mr. Doral, and I believe Mr. Doral is still at the wastewater treatment plant. And this was Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer is the one over here, and he was actually the superintendent of the wastewater treatment facility as well as the water facilities in Baraboo. And Mr. Kramer was nice enough to show us around. And Mr. Doral is the one who actually runs the wastewater treatment facility. Now, this is one of the control panels that controls all the wastewater treatment facility. And because it is such an important thing, you don't want it to be going out. You don't want it to have a breakdown. They actually had a secondary control panel that would run everything. So they wanted to make sure it would always be running. Now, this is the moment you've been waiting for. Let's go with our first journey with Timmy. Right here, when you take a look at this, this is influent. This is untreated water that comes into the wastewater treatment plant. So it's not going to be Timmy. Timmy's not in here. This is just a wastewater. Remember what I said. Approximately 99% of all sewage is the wastewater. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story here. And some of you may take this story and you may cry. So look over at the Kleenex boxes. If you need to grab a Kleenex, please do so. But how many of you had a fish at one time? Raise your hands. Okay, I see a couple of you have your hands raised. Now, if your fish passed away, and I know because my son had several fish, and for some reason, the Wittoon family, we're not good with pets. Our fish always seem to die. Now, if you're like our family, what did you do with your fish? What did you do with your fish? Okay, what did you do over there with your fish? Now, if you said you had a ceremony and you flushed it down the toilet, well, that's what we did. And if we didn't do that, we put it in a nice little coffin box and then we put it into, the trash can. So it would go and it would be buried properly. But a lot of times we just put it in the toilet and we flushed. And did your parents say that your fish is going to go to fishy heaven? Well, I have some bad news for you. It did probably go to fishy heaven, but what it did was it went through this first. This is the first step. This is what's used to grind large solids into small pieces. And they have a pre-screener that was added in 2007. So your fish may have gone to fishy heaven, but your fish went as a lot of little pieces. You might say, why do they have a grinder here? When they gave us a tour, they talked about all kinds of things that have been flushed down the toilets over the years that they found here. And that takes me back to a story of my youngest son. He's in third grade now. But when he was about 3 or 4 years old, I noticed that our downstairs bathroom was not flushing. And I couldn't figure out why. And then once I started looking a little bit more carefully, I had noticed that he had flushed little people. You know those little people that you played with? How many of you played with little people? Well, he wanted to see how many little people he could flush down the toilet at once. I was not happy. I could not get it unplugged. So here's a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, I forget how old he was. I dragged him along with me to Menards at like 6 in the morning. As soon as they opened up, I was up there. And we got what I call a super plunger. And it took quite a long time to flush it down. But those are the types of things that this grinder is needed for. They need to grind sticks, balls, washcloths, things like that. They need to grind them into smaller pieces so it doesn't wreck the rest of the equipment. So here we go. This is a phosphorus removal tank with floating mixers. And the new pumps came in 2007. And here there's several tanks lined up. And if you can see, I'm in the background. Mr. Phillips is taking a picture. And we're talking about how the phosphorus is being removed. So here we do have phosphorus being removed from the water. Then it goes into these aeration basins. And these tanks are used to dissolve oxygen to the treated water. So a lot of the oxygen is removed during when the waste first comes in, and now they need to add it back. Now, these are clarifiers, and these have tops on it. They don't have to have tops. And what you see in here is this basic thing right here. It just spins around and around and around. So now all of your scum comes up to the top and it floats. And it removes that. Any sinkers that you have, things that sink to the bottom, there's another one of these at the bottom stirring it, and it actually brings it all to one spot and it gets collected. And ultimately, all the sludge, all the things that drop to the bottom come here. And this is a press, and it applies 500 pounds of pressure per square inch. And this is actually used to remove all the water from the solid material. And once it comes through here, they add some lime to it. And here's where Timmy's journey ends, at the Baraboo wastewater facility. So when you look at this, when you look at all these things, you might say, well, what is that? Well, that's all of your, your sewage. This is where Timmy ends up. And you might say, well, what do they do with this? Well, in the wintertime, they store it in these large sheds. And once summer rolls around, they will actually either pay farmers, or sometimes farmers will pay them to spread it on their fields. It's manure. And I know some of you are thinking, oh, that's gross. But what's the difference between spreading, our poo on a cornfield or a hay field or a vegetable field, or cow manure or pig manure? It's all used to fertilize the ground. Now, the journey for the water does not end. As of 2007, they used to add chlorine to the water, but as of 2007, they actually use ultraviolet light to kill any bacteria. Then it goes through this steps, and when they added the chlorine, it would actually take 45 minutes to pass through this entire tank. And then eventually, the water comes down some stairs, and this is designed to add more water in it. And if we remember, I told you that this is located right next to the Baraboo River, and the reason for that is the wastewater is sent right back into the Baraboo River. Now, some of you are probably saying, gross. Well, how many of you have ever taken a tour of the treatment facility? And if you ever notice, there's a fish tank back here. And that fish tank is with water, and the water comes from the treatment plant. And Mr. Dora was explaining that they have the fish in there with this water, and they have it in there so kids could see how clean the water is. It's clean enough we could actually drink it. But you can see that it's really clean. It's probably cleaner than the water in the Baraboo River. So it goes back in the Baraboo River. Now, this is one of their labs. We've done a lot of neat things in our lab throughout the year. And you see graduated cylinders, you see beakers. Well, they have a lot of that same equipment here. Here's one of the neat machines. They actually test the water for solids to make sure the water that's going into the Baraboo River is free of any solid material. Now, the other interesting thing about what goes on is that there's some lift stations. When you flush the toilet, for the most part in Baraboo, that water, that sewage goes downhill to the wastewater treatment facility. There's only a couple spots. This was by the old Pierce's. It's not a Pierce's, it's a, what is it? It's like a renewal center. It's where they sell used windows and stuff like that. It's out by the log cabin. So that's one of the lift stations. And there's one other lift station. Otherwise, everything else, 62 miles of sewage here in Baraboo is basically gravity fed. And so there's the lift station. And here you see the log cabin right here. And here's one of the booster stations. And I'm not sure how much this booster station gets used anymore because they actually put out the new water tower out by Menards. And that's to make sure there's enough water pressure in Baraboo, up at Menards and up at Walmart. Now, you might think of these storm sewer storm sewers that you see out on the roads. A lot of people think these lead right to the sewer plant, and a lot of these actually lead directly to the river. Now, there have been updates in the law, and more recently, municipalities are supposed to actually treat all their stormwater as well. And for a town like Baraboo, it's not a huge issue, but can you imagine a city the size of Milwaukee, and what are they going to do with all their water? And I don't know if you knew this, but there was actually a big dig in Milwaukee, and there's a huge tunnel underneath the city of Milwaukee, and that's where they store a lot of their rainwater until they can treat it. In the olden days, a lot of that accidentally would get dumped into Lake Michigan. So if you were down in Milwaukee and you see a beach and you see something that looks like a Baby Ruth candy bar, it's not a Baby Ruth candy bar. It was probably a little Timmy floating around, because if the sewer plants got overwhelmed by a lot of rain, the treatment facilities, they had to dump their sewage. And it's no different when we had our last flood. If you remember, when we had our last flooding, Reedsburg sewer plant was overwhelmed, and some of that debris got into the Baraboo River. Now, I do want to take a few minutes just to talk about septic system. These are the septic tanks that you see out in the country. And you are going to have to know this for the test. So you have a handout. So know all these different parts. You're going to have to identify them on a test. So let me repeat this. If you're not listening, yes, you in the back, if you're not listening, you need to know this for the test. So make sure you study it. So you need to know the different parts, the septic tank, the clean out. Right here, that's where you see those are usually above ground, where you can get down into it and you can clean these out. Then you have your drain field or your distribution center. Remember, 99% of sewage is water. So where does all that water go? Well, you're not going to store that in a tank. Most of it goes into the drain field, and the ground actually does a really nice job of taking organic waste and cleaning it so it doesn't pollute the groundwater. So here you can see you got a T-baffle, you got your scum on top, you've got your solids on the bottom. Now when this fills up, that's why if you live in a country, how many of you live in a country? If you live in a country, you have a truck come out and it pumps this out every so many months, maybe once a year. If you're got a small family, maybe every other year. But you need to get these pumped out, otherwise your septic system will back up. Now, they have had problems with these in the past. If these are not placed properly, if you have poor drainage, this could pollute the groundwater. So it's really important to have good depth between your drain field and the ground. If not, you could pollute the groundwater.